everyone, nice to meet you. I am Namusori, any coach. The lecture we prepare for this time is a React lecture. React is a JavaScript library used to configure the user screen or user interface. The React library is a popular library for configuring UI with the structure of single-page application. In order to properly learn and apply React to the project, we need basic knowledge of JavaScript and understanding of HTML and CSS first. This lecture is based on the premise that you have a basic understanding of JavaScript based on ECMAScript 6, HTML, and CSS. The entire course consists of two main parts. First, part 1 is going to learn about the basic concepts of React and MoveX and grammar related skills with simple examples. And you can't leave out the design elements in configuring the user UI, so I'm going to apply Material UI for this part. I won't go into this Material UI itself in depth, but let's practice how to use it while trying using different kinds of components. There are so many components that Material UI is provided, and you can check it in their website. You can just search materialui.com and you can see there are so many components that they're provided. We are not going to use all of it, but we are going to use some of it to make sure you have an experience with Material UI. And in part 2, we are going to proceed with the actual project based on what we learned in part 1. We are not going to use TypeScript in part 1 to focus on React and MoveX, but we will also use TypeScript in part 2. So we will proceed step by step through this project called Trevor Club by applying React, MoveX, Material UI, and TypeScript. So, I hope that this lecture will help you understand React more easily and apply it to project. Now, let's get started on our way. The contents we will cover in lecture 1 are the basic concepts of React. Let's take a look at what kind of library React is and what it means to create a user interface with the structure of a single page application using React. In addition to this, there are various components or things necessary for UI configuration using React, and we will configure a basic development environment. Let's take a look at what MPA and SPA are like. MPA means a multi-page application. You can understand that the MPA method is a client structure for existing web applications. The client requests a specific page from the server. Then the server dynamically generates the page and sends information about the page to the client as a response. Then the client presents the screen to the user with that response information. Even if there are requests on another page and multiple client requests, the server has a structure in which our pages are created and responded to those requests. In this case, if you have MPA structure, you need to update the entire page even if there is a small change in data. And from the server's point of view, the task of creating a page for every request of a number of clients in progress. The servlet JSP container, which we are generally aware of in creating pages like when we create dynamic pages. On the other hand, in the structure of a single page application, the client first requests a specific page from the server, and the server sends a single HTML page with empty space. Then the client that receives the blank space will request data later. It requests the data to fill the page from the server, and the server responds with JSON type data. Then the client is based on the data to create the page. In other words, the difference between MPA and SPA becomes the difference between whether the server or the client creates the page requested by user. Single page application does not create a page on the server. The server plays the role of sending only relevant data according to the client request. The client composes the page based on the data and proceeds to create the page. When creating a page like this, it is created using JavaScript. React is what makes the page creation in JavaScript as a library. If you use React, you can understand the form that allows us to compose the page more quickly and easily becomes the form of the client. Now let's take a brief look at the structure of React constructing user UI in a way. React composes user UI based on components. In order to understand the meaning of constructing a user UI based on components, we need to understand what type of user UI has been constructed in the existing web application, and compare it with React is really important, I think. It is good to know why we need to use React more than the common existing web application. In the past, assuming that we create a page in a web application, the languages that make up the page are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Of course, it is not common to use a separate library or framework such as jQuery or Bootstrap, but the base is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Each of these languages has a different role when configuring a single page. HTML represents the structure of the page and defines the structure. And how this page looks and how it is represented is defined by CSS. JavaScript is responsible for handling user events and events occurring in the system. Different languages take their roles and form a single page. What these different languages use to communicate with each other, and we are all curious how they communicate to each other, and they actually communicate in the DOM object called document object model, which is shortcut we call it DOM. One page is expressed using a different language with which the role called DOM. Because of the different languages and different roles, there are inevitable difficulties in bringing them together and managing them. So when configuring a page, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is managed as separate files. So this is a general configuration method to configure UI. However, if you manage different files like this, there will be problems in reusability. For example, an auto-completion window and input window is created. It is assumed that this is reused in multiple pages. To process this part, open each file and copy paste the corresponding code part. So, React bundles this HTML, CSS, JavaScript so that it can bend configure as a single component. In other words, if you create a component using the React library, the HTML element, CSS element, JavaScript are grouped together in this component. So if you want to reuse it, it is the React user UI that creates the structure in the form of importing and using the component. From now on, when we compose a page, we design this page to consist of certain components. You can understand that making those components using React will be the general way we organize pages in the future. The next thing we will see is about the basic libraries used when configuring UI with this React. The library you see here is called React.js, which is the core of the React. This library used when creating a component and configuring this component. There are two kinds of libraries used when rendering such a component on the page. First is called React-native.js, and the second one is React-dom.js. Whether the device that represents the page is a mobile device or a desktop device is either React Native or React DOM. We plan to conduct a future class in the form of using React-dom.js in React.js. When we make React components, state management is one of the very important points. A store for managing the state of this component will appear later. Then there are management libraries that can manage this store. Representatively, there are libraries called Mobex and Redux. Of course, there is not only one library related to Mobex and Redux. React-mobex.js and mobex.js libraries exist separately. I will explain this part again when we learn about the store, but when we manage the store with a third party library, there are basically Mobex class libraries and Redux class libraries, and among them, we are going to run this class on Mobex basis. In addition to this, the Axios library used to communicate with the server, and the React router library used to define routing. We are going to use some additional libraries including AutoBind. When configuring a page with React and User UI, the React library itself is a library focused on actually creating components and rendering the page, so other elements do not exist. So when configuring UI with React, you have to use various third-party libraries. Among them, we select to use Mobex and Axios and React routers. When related to this, we will also use a Material UI library and libraries related to Material UI. This related contents will be explained again as we proceed with the project and proceed with the example code. The very basic contents of React are covered at this level in this lecture, and I hope it will help you understand the basic concepts of React more easily right now. Next time, we will configure the development environment with React and conduct a real class. I hope this lecture helped you know about the React, and hopefully you will enjoy this class more as we use and actually do some example code. Now, then today's class will end here, and hope to see you again next section. Thank you. Bye.